The lighthouses are supposed to keep us safe, guiding ships away from danger, but some of them hold secrets that should never be uncovered. The following are 3 true horror stories, all taking place in or around abandoned lighthouses. Now turn off the lights and listen closely. Tess, what would you do if you saw a beam from a lighthouse that was demolished decades ago? Out on the black water, I saw a light that couldn't exist, and by the time I realized where it was coming from, it was already guiding me straight toward the ruins. I've been fishing off the Maine coast for most of my life. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills, and I know these waters better than most. On calm nights, I sometimes stay out later than I should, casting a line under the stars and letting the silence settle in. That's what I was doing one night in late September a couple of years ago. The ocean was unusually still. No wind, no waves, just a blanket of fog rolling in slow from the east. I was about to head back when I noticed a beam cutting through the mist, a strong, steady light sweeping across the water. For a second, I was almost relieved. Out on the ocean, a lighthouse beam is like a friend. It means safety, a reminder of the shoreline. But then my stomach dropped. I knew exactly where that light was coming from. And it wasn't possible. Decades ago, there had been a lighthouse perched on the cliffs of Blackthorn Point. It was torn down after a violent storm collapsed half the structure, and the rest was demolished for safety. I'd seen the rubble myself, just jagged stone and twisted metal left on the cliffs. Yet here I was, staring at a light shining from the very place it had once stood. At first I told myself maybe I was mistaken, maybe it was a ship's spotlight or even a trick of the fog. But then I heard it, a low, mournful foghorn. The sound carried across the water, deep enough to rattle in my chest. It blew once, then again. I gripped the sides of my boat, my skin prickling. That horn hadn't sounded in over 50 years. I should have turned back right then. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pulled me forward. I adjusted course and started motoring toward the cliffs. As I drew closer, the light grew sharper, brighter. It swept across my boat, and I swear for a moment it felt like it paused on me, holding steady before moving on. The fog thickened the closer I got. My spotlight barely cut more than a few feet ahead, but that ghostly beam still shone clear, guiding me toward the shoreline. I could hear the surf crashing against the rocks now, louder than it should have been, like the waves themselves were trying to warn me away. Then through the mist I made out the ruins, just as I remembered them. Broken stone, collapsed walls, a rusting staircase that led to nowhere. The lighthouse was still gone, but the light, impossibly, was still flashing from mid-air where the lantern room used to be. I cut the engine and just floated there, staring. That's when I saw movement. A figure, up on the cliffs, standing in the exact spot the lighthouse would have been. It was tall and thin, silhouetted by the glow with what looked like a cap pulled low over its face. I blinked, thinking it had to be some trick of the fog, but when the foghorn sounded again, the figure lifted its hand to a long lever at its side, like it was operating it. Every hair on my body stood on end. I scrambled for my radio, but all I got was static. The figure turned toward the ocean, and though I couldn't make out its face, I swear I felt its eyes sweep over me, like the beam itself. I don't know how long I sat frozen there, unable to breathe, unable to move. The waves started to pull me closer to the rocks, and I finally snapped out of it, firing the engine and turning hard away. As I sped back into the fog, I heard one last blast of the horn, longer this time, louder, as if it were chasing me out. The light cut out all at once, plunging everything into black. I didn't stop until I was nearly back at the harbor. Even then, when I looked over my shoulder, I swore I still saw the faintest glow through the fog, flickering like it was watching me leave. When I got back to shore, I asked around the docks if anyone else had seen the light. A couple of old-timers gave me strange looks and shook their heads. One man, older than the rest, pulled me aside. He told me that the last keeper of Blackthorn Point had refused to leave his post even when the storms made the structure unsafe. When the tower finally collapsed, his body was never recovered. Locals say he stayed behind, still manning the light, still sounding the horn, trying to guide ships that no longer needed him. I don't go near Blackthorn Point anymore, but sometimes on foggy nights when I'm out at sea, I'll catch a flicker of light on the horizon where no light should be. And if I listen close over the waves and the wind, I swear I can still hear that horn, long, low, and waiting. Not every lighthouse guides you to safety. Some pull you into something you can never escape. I thought I was climbing toward the light, but every time I reached the top, I found myself back where I started, trapped in that endless spiral of rusted iron and stone. I was traveling along the northern coast last fall, just driving aimlessly and stopping whenever something caught my interest. That's how I came across the lighthouse. It stood alone on a cliffside, battered by decades of salt and wind, its paint long peeled away. The windows were broken, the lantern at the top shattered. A weathered sign nearby simply read, "Condemned, do not enter." Of course, that only made me want to explore it more. The door was barely hanging on its hinges, so I slipped inside easily. The air was cool, damp, and heavy with the smell of mold. The sound of the ocean outside was muffled, replaced by the hollow drip of water somewhere deep inside the tower. The spiral staircase stretched up into the darkness, cast iron steps coated with rust. I hesitated for a moment, then pulled out my flashlight and started climbing. At first, it felt like any other abandoned building. Each footstep echoed off the curved walls, my beam of light gliding across peeling paint and carved graffiti. But after a few minutes, something about the climb began to feel strange. The staircase seemed longer than it should have been. I kept expecting to see the hatch at the top, but it never appeared. The only thing that changed was the rhythmic sound of my boots and the faint ringing in my ears. Finally, I spotted the trapdoor above me. Relieved, I hurried up the last few steps and pushed it open. Cool light spilled in as I climbed through, only to find myself standing on the ground floor again. I froze. The stone floor, the broken door, the same patches of moss along the walls. My flashlight was still in my hand. I turned in a slow circle, trying to make sense of it. Somehow, impossibly, the hatch had led me back to where I'd started. I told myself I must have made a mistake. Maybe there was a second staircase or I'd gotten disoriented. So I tried again, step after step winding upward. The same rusty railing, the same graffiti marks I recognized from before. My legs burned by the time I reached the hatch again. I pushed it open, climbed through, and once again I was on the ground floor. Panic started to creep in. My heart thudded hard in my chest. I went back to the door I'd entered through, desperate to just leave. But when I pulled it open, there was nothing but darkness outside. Not the cliff, not the ocean. Just an endless black void. I slammed the door shut and backed away. I didn't know what else to do. So I tried the stairs again, and again, each time the same outcome. Hours could have passed, or maybe just minutes. My legs grew weaker, my throat dry. It was as if the tower was swallowing me whole, trapping me in a loop I couldn't escape. Somewhere along the climb, I started noticing something new. A sound. At first it was faint, like fabric brushing against metal. But the higher I climbed, the louder it became. Footsteps, not mine. They were just above me on the staircase, always out of sight. Heavy, deliberate, metallic steps that matched my pace. Whenever I stopped, the footsteps stopped too. Whenever I hurried, they hurried faster. I shouted, my voice cracked, echoing painfully around the stone walls. The footsteps didn't respond, they just waited. On my last attempt, I climbed until my legs felt like they would give out. The footsteps were so close above me I swore I could feel the vibrations in the railing. My flashlight flickered, and in that dim glow, I saw something that nearly made me fall back down the stairs. A hand, pale, wet, gripping the railing just above me. The skin was stretched thin, veins dark beneath it, the fingernails cracked and jagged. I froze, staring upward, waiting for the rest of whatever it was to come into view. But it didn't. The hand just gripped the railing tightly, as if waiting for me to take the next step. That broke me. I turned and ran down the staircase, my boots slamming the iron steps so hard I thought they'd give out beneath me. I didn't stop until I burst through the door at the bottom, this time finding myself outside again, stumbling onto the cliffside in the grey afternoon light. I didn't look back. I ran to my car, heart hammering, and didn't stop driving until the lighthouse was miles behind me. But even now, when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear those footsteps echoing above me. Slow, patient, following just out of sight. And sometimes in the dark corners of my room, I think I see a pale hand gripping the shadows, waiting for me to climb again. Sometimes the ghosts of lighthouse keepers refuse to leave their post, even long after the light has gone out. I still can't explain what I saw that day, but every time I look at the photo, I feel like the man inside that lighthouse is still looking back at me. A couple of summers ago, I visited a small coastal town in Maine while on a road trip. I've always loved lighthouses, so when I learned there was a decommissioned one open for self-guided tours, I decided to check it out. It was early afternoon when I pulled into the gravel lot. The lighthouse stood tall against the grey ocean, its once bright paint now faded and peeling, the glass at the top clouded with salt. There was no staff at the entrance, just a small donation box, a faded sign that read "Tour at your own risk," and a door left slightly open. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of mildew and old seawater. My footsteps echoed on the stone floor as I looked around. The lower level was mostly empty, just a few plaques on the wall describing the history of the place. According to one, the last keeper had died there in the 1940s, and after his death, the lighthouse was eventually shut down. I started up the spiral staircase, running my hand along the cold iron rail. Every few steps, I thought I heard something faint above me, like the scuff of a boot. But each time I stopped to listen, the sound vanished, replaced only by the distant crash of waves outside. When I finally reached the lantern room at the top, it was empty. Just a dusty, cracked lens and a few broken tools scattered on the floor. The view, though, was incredible. The endless ocean stretching out in every direction, gulls circling lazily overhead. I pulled out my phone and snapped a quick picture of the lantern room, mostly just to remember it later. That's when I felt it, the distinct sensation of not being alone. It was subtle at first, like the prickle of static electricity at the back of my neck. The room was silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing just behind me. I turned quickly, my heart jumping, but of course the room was still empty. I laughed nervously at myself and decided I'd had enough. I made my way back down the staircase, the hollow clang of my steps echoing louder than before. By the time I reached the bottom, I was almost jogging. I stepped outside, relieved to feel the sun again, and drove off without looking back. It wasn't until that night at my motel that I remembered the photo. Lying in bed, I opened my camera roll to look through the day's pictures. When I got to the shot of the lantern room, I froze. The room looked exactly as I'd seen it earlier. Dusty lens, broken tools. But there was something else too. Standing just inside the glass, directly where I had been moments before, was a figure. He was tall, wearing a dark, old-fashioned uniform with brass buttons, the kind lighthouse keepers used to wear in the early 1900s. His cap cast a shadow over his face, but I could clearly see the outline of a man's head, shoulders and arms. At first, I told myself it had to be a reflection, maybe even a trick of the light. But the more I stared at it, the less that made sense. The figure wasn't faint or distorted. He was solid, like someone had been standing there when I took the picture. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that shadowed face staring back at me through the glass. The next morning, I drove back to the lighthouse, determined to prove it was nothing. When I arrived, the place was just as empty as before. I walked through each floor slowly, checking every corner, every shadow, but I never saw another person. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As I climbed the staircase again, my chest grew tight, and by the time I reached the lantern room, I could barely breathe. The room looked the same, dusty, broken, abandoned. But as I stood there, I suddenly heard the faint scrape of boots on the stairs below. I froze. The sound grew louder, closer, climbing toward me. My heart pounded as I backed against the wall, staring at the doorway, and then it stopped. Silence. I waited, every muscle tensed, but nothing appeared. After what felt like an eternity, I bolted, running down the stairs 2 at a time, nearly tripping before I burst out the door into the open air. That was the last time I set foot in that lighthouse. Later, I showed the photo to a local at a diner. His face went pale as soon as he saw it. He told me the last keeper of the lighthouse had died suddenly of a heart attack in the lantern room, still wearing his uniform. According to town rumors, some say he never left his post, still keeping watch for ships that will never come. I tried to delete the picture from my phone that night, but no matter how many times I pressed the delete button, it stayed in my gallery. The only difference now is that the figure seems a little closer each time I look at it. And sometimes, when the room is dark and my phone screen lights up, I swear I can see his eyes beneath the brim of his cap, looking directly at me. Thus, if you ever find yourself near a forgotten lighthouse, remember these stories and ask yourself if the light you're seeing is really there at all. Thanks for listening, subscribe, and as always, stay safe out there.